Today we're going to be learning how to set up your Sony camera for real estate photography and real estate video. Today I'll be using the Sony A7 III. Love this camera. Super great for video and photography equally. Well, in this camera, on the dial, you have built-in areas where you can save presets. There's a preset 1, preset 2. Now on other cameras, like what I'm filming with here, the A6400, you can actually still save your settings, but you just have to do it inside by using the menu system. But if you're shooting with the A6500, A6600, they also have presets built in on the dial. So we're gonna jump in here, flip on our camera, and run through the appropriate settings for photography. Awesome, so we're gonna jump into our menu here. And so we're looking at photography. So typically we're shooting with JPEGs. And 2x3, fine for the JPEG quality. For a lens compensation, you wanna have those on auto, because what's great about these bodies is it'll take your lens and correct it. That saves a lot of time in editing. But if you're shooting raw, it doesn't do the auto correction, and that'll have to be done in the computer. Drive mode will be continuous bracketed. So when we jump in here, your continuous bracketed should be 2 stops between each bracket, and it'll be a 5-image bracket. In bracket settings, this is when you can use your self timer. So if you're shooting into a mirror or a reflection in glass, this is where you jump into this setting, and you could set a 2-second timer, 5 or 10-second timer when you're taking that photograph. And here you can also select your bracket order. So I like to have darkest to brightest or brightest to darkest. At default, it sets it up as 0 and then minus plus, but the images just look a little wacky when you pull it into your computer. So I like to see an even darkest to brightest when I'm taking my brackets. Now here, we'll come back to this section. At this area, this is where you actually can save and recall your memory settings. I typically like single shot autofocus. So for your metering mode, I really like to have it set on entire screen for real estate photography. So it's looking at the entire screen and trying to balance the meter accordingly. So when you're shooting real estate photography, I just have the picture profile off and just use the standard look for your color. When you're using a tripod, make sure you have steady shot turned off. Now, that's critical because sometimes the steady shot, it'll try to steady a shot that's already stable on the tripod, so it'll actually make your images blurry. If you're noticing some of your images are really not turning out as sharp as they should be, then it's probably because steady shot was turned on. Now, if you're taking shots handheld, then absolutely have steady shot turned on. Because if you're outside walking in acreage, sometimes it's difficult to shoot that type of property with a tripod. There's lots of slopes and rocks. So in those circumstances, I like to do handheld, but I always turn that on because it'll save your images if you have some shake in your hands when you're taking your pictures. I always like to have rule of thirds turned on in the grid. It helps you break up your image, see how it's framed. It's a very beneficial tool. In a lot of these Sony cameras, they have a custom My Menu section where you can bring in specific settings that you use frequently so you're not having to constantly dig into the menu. Make sure you take some time to really go in here. This is how I like to have mine set up. So I have format so I can change between JPEG and RAW. I have steady shot right there so I can turn on and off. My bracket settings so I can jump in and turn on and off the timer when I'm shooting in front of a mirror. And my profile picture settings. So if I'm shooting video, I can turn on a specific profile setting, or if I'm shooting photography, I make sure it's off. When I'm shooting video, I have record level so I can adjust the audio if I'm shooting somebody who is talking. And then I have my format here. So you want to periodically reformat your card. Typically, it's good to do that at the beginning of the week, so that way you stay fresh and it prevents crashes. And then this next menu setting, I like to have it set up. This is specifically for video, so choosing between 4K and your frame rate and your zebra settings. But we'll jump into that in a moment. Now we'll jump to our quick selection menu. So here you can jump in your focus area. I like to use a flexible large spot, so that way I know I can pick the exact location on the screen that I want to focus on. For focus mode, I like to do a single spot autofocus. For continuous bracketing, we do 2 stops between each image. Now, for white balance, you can use auto white balance for the exterior of the home, but for the inside of the home and for twilight photos, make sure you're using custom white balance. So here I like to come to Kelvin and you press over and you can manually bump up and down until you get something that looks pleasing, looks natural. We want to make sure that things aren't getting too yellow on the inside of the home. And your ISO, make sure you have your ISO set at 200 so we have minimal noise when we're out shooting our photographs. And so back in our other settings, whenever f-stop at 6.3, and then your shutter speed will be continually variable depending on if you have a bright or a dark subject that you're photographing. Perfect. Now that we have all of our settings appropriately set for real estate photography, now I'm going to go in and I'm going to save this to my preset 1 on my dial. So I'm going to come over to my memory settings and recall and memory. So I'll select here, memory, and I want to save it in my spot 1. Boom, register. Perfect. So now you can jump into recall and you can recall through the menu, or you can turn your dial to number 1 and simply recall your settings.